The Wild Tameless is about expanding our sphere of awareness into greater fields of consciousness. Our guests share their wisdom found from branching out into the unseen realms through alternative philosophy and mystical experiences. We focus on the soul component of the human experience and also touch on mind, body, and heart as we introduce pragmatic practices to create a meaningful and fulfilling life. We touch on modalities of health, ceremony, and ritual to help people harmonize their own energy and open up to the magic around them. The Wild Tameless is nature. It's the human spirit. It's music, art, and creation itself. This podcast is about helping people open to the great mystery so that we can collectively remember our place in the web of life and reorient our way forward for generations to come. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Kyle Dow. What's up, everyone? Welcome to this episode of The Wild Tameless. This is going to be a solo cast on death. And what inspired this episode is the passing of my dear brother, Carl Andre Cote. He passed away a few weeks ago after a long and hard-fought battle with cancer. And naturally, that comes with a lot of grief for me and a lot of learning as I was with him in a close way throughout some of the process. So during this episode, I'm going to speak a little bit more about the specifics of that circumstance and some of my philosophy on death, and also how my experience with Carl culminated in his celebration of life just this past weekend. And I'm out here in a somewhat natural setting, so there will be some noise to contend with. And despite the beautiful vegetation in the backdrop, there is a city, the city of Prince George, just below this plateau. And so there will be some loud vehicles because people here like loud vehicles. All right, where to begin? So I guess I'll speak a little bit about how I met Carl. We met in a personal development program called Fit for Service, which is run by Aubrey Marcus, and that was back in 2019. And I think he was still living in Alberta at the time in Red Deer, and shortly after he migrated to the mountains in the Kootenays, various places, but mostly in the Kootenays. And so we both showed up to the first in-person event for Fit for Service in Austin, Texas. And we're both these like long-haired mountain people. And we looked like brothers, and instantly we had a bond that did feel like brotherhood. And I think in part due to the nature of that container, the connection is deepened in a really quick way. So we're meeting each other in our full truth and our full expression as we dive into different exercises of unpacking the layers of conditioning. A lot of our journey also included medicine ceremonies, so different plant medicines, and again it is such a rich opportunity and container for seeing the true essence of one another. And through that process, we really just deepened into this friendship and brotherhood, and it was really beautiful. Carl is one of the people in my life that I have felt fully seen by. And I think that's really meaningful. Those people that know us through and through the good times and the bad, and show up for all of them. Carl and I would have long, beautiful conversations, even though we didn't live in close proximity to each other. And then we would make the most of the opportunities to hang out with one another and connect and spend time in the outdoors. We both are adventurous beings, and yeah, we had some adventures in the mountains, and I'll share some of my favorite memories a little bit later. So in his passing, it's been really challenging and a process of continual grief, intermittent grief that comes at poignant moments, and I really just try to honor those waves of emotion. The thing that brings me some peace in this process of loss is really my personal philosophy and understanding of the greater process of existence that we're a part of as humans. So having an awareness of the spiritual process, not just the egoic process, has been helpful. And my belief is that there is the formless as well as the form. So our human body exists in form, but it is animated by the formless. And so we might call this spirit or soul. And if we think about the multi-dimensionality of the human being, we have mind, body, heart, and soul. And so with that, I could honor the natural world and the cycles of the natural world, right? So as I look around at nature here, I recognize the law of impermanence, that the tree, the birch tree, it's this cluster of three, the Holy Trinity that's looking over me, and I'm really grateful for its presence. And in that, I know that it's not going to be here forever, right? As humans, we will lose every single thing that we love and cherish, including ourselves, our own life, our own body. And that is tragic. It truly is tragic, and it's the human condition. So finding different levels of peace with this is really important. And so to know that the experience will continue for Carl, whatever he's called to next. And I don't claim to know the exact cycle of things or where he's going, but I know that his adventure continues. And so with that, we could recognize death as a ceremony, arguably the second most important, beautiful, magical ceremony that we get to experience. Maybe the first one is death, and maybe they're paramount, and one is not tantamount to the other. And we can embrace it as a ceremony if it is a transition and not a terminus. And this is, remains philosophical until we have a direct experience of it. And so perhaps that direct experience of it is a near-death experience, or perhaps it is receiving messages from loved ones who have crossed over, and that might come from the natural world in signs and symbols or different synchronicities in nature, being visited by different beings, different animal totems. And really this is a felt knowing. So it's something that happens internally, right? A circumstance could just be coincidental if it's not actually felt internally. So when the outside world meets the inside world and we feel that truth tingle or that sensation inside, whatever it may be for us, that's a sign of synchronicity. On top of that, I have witnessed death in ceremony. So many people enter ceremony, altered states of consciousness or rites of passage or initiations, and have a ego death. And I've had some of those. And also what I witnessed in a psilocybin ceremony was the experience of transition from a energetic standpoint. So I could see myself as simply a ball of energy, and when we get right down to it, that's what we are. And I could see the point of transition where this body just like disintegrated, but then instantly emerged as something else. So the passage of time was definitely sped up in that experience, but it made so much sense. And again, it was like felt, and there are no words to describe what I saw and what I experienced, but it certainly felt like the truth. To make sense of it all, we really have to zoom out from normal time, the chronological order that we experience as a human, and recognize that the human lifetime is really just a blink of the eye in the massive expanse of the universe that actually exists beyond space-time. And we get to experience space-time so that we may be a part of the human condition, which includes this process of grief, but also all the beauty, the bliss, and the love. I would say that Eastern philosophy has a greater awareness, appreciation, and embracing of this in comparison to our modern Western society. And one master that comes to mind is Maharaji, as described through the teachings of Ram Dass. And Ram Dass speaks about this time where Maharaji was walking down the street with a devotee, and suddenly he burst out laughing. And the devotee was kind of like taken aback, and he's like, Maharaji, like, what's so funny? And Maharaji was like, oh, so-and-so died. And the devotee was like, like what? He's completely baffled by that statement and his action and his reaction. And he's like, you monster, like, have some compassion, And I'm sure he didn't have the cojones to say that to Maharaji, but Maharaji stopped and looked at him, and tears were just streaming down his face. Yet he was smiling, and there was that ever-present love that was emanating from his eyes and his being. And so he both had the compassion for the terminus of that human experience, and also recognized the beauty of the transition and knew what was to come next for that being. And so really that is the paradox, to hold both our human grief and the celebration of that transition. There's a beautiful saying that death is perfectly safe, but dying sucks. The process is agonizing. And I witnessed this in my brother Carl as he went through a year-long battle. Really, the cancer started years before, maybe a decade before, and he was able to beat it at that time into remission. And then he came back, and over the course of a year, he went through, a handful of surgeries, a bunch of chemo treatments. He bounced around from all these hospitals, his family in tow. He received massive support from his parents and his whole family. His wife and his 2 young children, who are 6 and 7 years old, were put through the agonizing process of him dying. And it was really hard to see him in that space. At one point, me and 2 other close brothers went to visit him in Kelowna, and I thought I was prepared to enter that space, and really I wasn't. Nothing could have prepared me for that. It was probably the chunk of time where he was in his worst state, with the exception of the 3 weeks before his passing. And as we entered into that little apartment that he was staying in, which was beautifully located on this lake in proximity to nature, although he was pretty immobilized and couldn't venture out of the house too easily. When I entered that space and saw him in his emaciated state, Carl was an incredible athlete, and I've always known him to be like muscular, and when I saw him, he had no hair, and he was really quite skinny, And that was really challenging for me to see him like that, and I just like felt for him. And outside of his physical experience, he was also in a huge amount of pain, and in that I felt really helpless. There was nothing I could offer him to ease his pain or to comfort him, and so that was super challenging for me. And I also learned in that process that we didn't really have to do anything other than be present. And there was this one moment, I think on the first night, where the four of us were in the kitchen, and Carl was hesitant to let us in. He had spoken about this to his parents and his wife. He almost canceled the invitation for us to join him. And so that first night we were trying to like figure out how to be with each other in the space. Sorry for the background noise. And we were sitting in the kitchen, and my brother Cote just put his hand on Carl's shoulder, and there was a progressive softening. We could see Carl settle and let down his guard, and all of us kind of like settled into this space, and it became this intuitive meditation where we all were just present. Nobody had to speak, nobody said anything for a substantial amount of time, probably half an hour, as we settled and just connected. And that was probably the most truthful aspect of that visit, where words couldn't match that shared felt experience. Our time continued to go on over the course of the next few days, and we just shared the space together, and we talked a little bit, and we laughed. There was laughter, there was fun involved, and Carl still was in a lot of pain, and I was often the first one to hear him when he was in distress, because I was sleeping in the living room and his bedroom was close to mine. So he would wake up in the middle of the night from the pain, and I would do my best to support him in that. And again, that feeling of helplessness was prevalent. And while it was challenging for me, I'm super grateful to have had that very real human experience with him. And I think that is what we get to experience as loved ones of others, right? Like true love is not just showing up for the celebration of life, but it's showing up in those times of need, and when the other is in their worst states, and to be able to love them in those states. I think that's like true connection, really, and unconditional love. And I don't mean, and there's nothing significant or heroic about that short amount of time that I spent with Carl in comparison to, his parents, who were basically there for the entire year, and his wife Bianca, who supported him through the whole time as well. And I can't imagine what it would be like to share that type of love and to witness our beloved in such agony. And there's a high likelihood that I will experience that at some point in my life. So through his process, I have this philosophical awareness and like spiritual awareness of the formless that supersedes the form. And from that perspective, I could actually alleviate a substantial amount of my suffering, as I don't get overly identified with the ego. And I know that there's something beyond it. And the stories in my mind are really what exacerbate the dissatisfaction of the present moment. And I know that that's also a product of my conditioning. So I could have this philosophy and awareness, and the spiritual teachings often fail when we're in the fire, right? So how am I meant to sit there while my friend's in agony and tell him that he can transcend his suffering, transcend his pain, which I do believe is possible, but I've never actually done it. And that's where I see a challenge in some of this spirituality or philosophical awareness. And when we think about, if I try to steelman that perspective of transcending pain, I think some of the most incredible examples are the people who have committed the act of immolation, which is the act of setting oneself on fire in protest of present social political circumstance. The most well-known example potentially of that is Quan Duc, who is the monk who set himself on fire. And there's pictures of him sitting in lotus pose, as still as can be, in flames. So he had the ability to shift his awareness into the undying aspect of himself. So he had that trained ability, and he also had faith in the continuation of the experience of his soul beyond his human form. And he also recognized that the scenario he was in was such bullshit, right? The social political scenario, that he's just like, all right, I'm out. I'm out, and allowed this gesture, this act of protest and rebellion to be enough to inspire change and to inspire others to act out or resist what is transpiring. One counter argument to that might be that it's escapist, right? He, rather than stick around and fight for what's right, he got out of Dodge. But here we are still considering this decades after the fact. And maybe his impact did have a ripple out effect. It certainly inspires me to recognize that sometimes there are a lot of times there are worse things than death. So perhaps Carl could have got to that place where he could transcend the agony that he was in, but the simple fact of the matter is that he didn't have that training, he didn't have that practice, and is also not encouraged in Western society. So he was at the mercy of his circumstance, and to witness that, was again really challenging. And he said to me at one point in time during my last visit with him, he said, could it be that I'm meant to die at this young age, 34, 35? Is this it? Is this like what I'm limited to in this human experience? On some level, I can embrace the macro circumstance of the universe and existence and the perfection of consciousness as it is, and how am I meant to preach perfection to one of my best friends in the last moments of his life when he's about to leave behind a family? And so those are the shortcomings, I think. Or perhaps it's not the shortcomings of spiritual philosophy or awareness, but really the paradox of existence. And so on the macro level, I could say, yeah, everything's perfect, everything is as it should be. And on the micro level, in the present moment, right, when we find that stillness in meditation or mindful awareness, everything is perfect as well. And in between is the human experience, and in between is the challenge that we face as humans. And also in that middle ground, we get to experience joy and celebrate existence as it is. And that's where I got to spend some time with Carl, and regrettably not as much as I would have liked. But I trumped that regret with gratitude for the precious moments. One of those precious moments, the story that I really like telling because it was a shared adventure, is when Carl and I climbed the Chief, which is a mountain in Squamish. It's recognized as the second largest granite monolith in the world, and it has some truly epic climbing on it. And I've been an avid climber for most of my life, or at least the last half of it. And I've stepped away from it in recent years. This experience was a few years ago. He sent me a message saying he was coming into town, and my response was via text was, sweet, let's climb the Chief and do DMT on top. And he kind of laughed and said facetiously, and what, base jump off the top? Neither of us were base jumpers, so that was representative of his disbelief. And he didn't know I was serious, and slowly it dawned on him that I was serious. And the reason why I was a little bit audacious is because Carl has only climbed outdoors like a handful of times in his whole life, and to climb a 500-meter mountain is no easy task. But I had trust in Carl's athleticism and capability, and so we tied in, and up we went up this beautiful climbing route, and I took the easiest path to the top, basically, and also timed it so that we would arrive when nobody was up there. It is a super popular hike for a lot of tourists visiting the area, so I timed it so we would arrive at nighttime. And we climbed the final pitches by headlamp, which brings another level of challenge and intimidation. And Carl was like spectacular through the whole thing. There was only one pitch where he got a little wigged out, as there was a great deal of exposure, so a vertical drop that he was kind of faced with truly for the first time of the climb, and he was a little bit dysregulated then. But he powered through it, and we made it to the top and had it to ourselves under the stars. And we dropped in. We dropped in a intentional ceremonial way with the entheogen known as DMT, which probably, if you're listening to this, you would be familiar with. And yeah, it was really lovely encountering those greater layers of intelligence beyond normal human perception. In my experience with DMT is that it's often a loving, benevolent presence. Carl unfortunately didn't have that deep of a trip, I don't think. We actually switched. We both had DMT pens, and we switched pens, and I had like a decent little blast off, and his was a little more grounded, but it was beautiful nonetheless. Another moment, another memory I'd like to share that I really cherish is in that year when we were in Fit for Service, one of the group meetups was in Sedona, and we had a peer-led ceremony where we dropped in with psilocybin and MDMA, which is a beautiful combination, as the MDMA really takes the edge off the psilocybin, and of course it has the heart-opening properties, and it's commonly known as a hippie flip. So we dropped in with that combination in a very intentional way. The space was held wonderfully by a dear brother of ours, and another brother, Ben, curated the playlist, and so the music is often a driving force of any ceremony. For the first half of the ceremony, we were directing our attention inward, so it was done in silence with a blindfold. Most of us had an eye mask of some sort. And then for the second half, we kind of emerged out of our personal journey and had a more outward connected journey. And I experienced a few things during that ceremony that were profound. One was a level of intersubjectivity that bordered on telepathy. It seemed like there very much was a shared felt experience as we were riding the same wavelength of the space. And in that was a very rich essence of love. And at one point in time, Carl was cuddling with his wife Bianca, and I went over and joined them, and I kind of came in behind him and was spooning him essentially, and it was just like so loving. And he said to me, "I've never felt so good being touched by a man before." And it was just like a really endearing and sweet moment, because I felt the same way. And really how I interpret that circumstance, that situation, that experience, is that I was actually loving beyond form, beyond gender, soul to soul. It was really meaningful for me to get beyond some of my reservations about sharing affection and intimacy with men. And there wasn't anything sexual about it. It was just sincere expression of affection and love. I hold that experience with reverence and carry it with me as I continue to meet people in that authentic way, and specifically men. To be able to break down those cultural barriers or societal barriers of how we interact with one another, right? Something that's been so conditioned through my experience in sports and just society as a whole. To decondition that is really significant, I would say, collectively, as we really begin to love our brothers in a deep and intimate way, like we do with our female connections and friendships. And really there's something there as well to be said about our connection with females, in that it doesn't have to be a attraction or intimacy that's based on the physicality, but a authentic, energetic connection and recognition of what lies beyond the form. Let's see if I could reel it back in here. So, those are some of my favorite memories with Carl. There were many other shared experiences. Hanging out with his family was super special as well. Seeing him in his role as a father and how he interacted with his children was really inspiring. And I know that he sacrificed a lot for his family, and that was a point of tension for him, was the responsibility of providing and maybe doing things that weren't the most aligned with his values and worldview in order to make sure that he could provide for his family. The reason why I mention that is because these things do have an impact on our health, right? The different lived traumas and also lived dissonance from our truth of being and our authentic expression do create energetic blockages in our system, which create disharmony, which could lead to disease. Now, there's no point really in sitting here and trying to dissect the situation and figure out what led to the eventual systemic breakdown of his physical being, although I do think it is representative of something that wasn't resolved, and maybe it's compounded from other lives, and that's just my personal belief system, and some people who have a more reductionary materialistic view, like mechanical view of the body and the human experience, might just say there's some simple cause and effect in there, and I think it's more complex than that. Ultimately, we'll never know, and so where we try to arrive is at a place of acceptance and peace with this whole situation. And that's what I tried to convey to people at his celebration of life. So I was invited by his wife, Bianca, to lead the ceremony at his celebration of life just this past weekend. And that was a big deal for me, having not done that previously. And the reason why she wanted it done in this way, rather than a more convention Western societal manner in a church or whatever the case may be, is because she felt that me and Carl shared the same worldview and belief systems and values, really. And so we wanted to introduce some ceremony and ritual into this process to help people with their grief. It was intimidating to me. That's maybe not the best word, but I recognize the significance of the invitation and also the potential dissonance between my worldview and the people who would be there to honor Carl. So simply put, the gathering of 100 or so people were not overly familiar with ceremony and ritual. There was some curiosity about how it would all unfold, and what transpired was beyond expectation. It was beautiful beyond imagination. We gathered in circle, and there was a land acknowledgement, and I shared some of the philosophy that I've outlined in this podcast, and I really invited people. As a loud motorcycle drives by, I really invited people to dance on that full spectrum of the human condition. I encouraged them to be authentic in their grief, and I encouraged them to be supportive of one another in people's expression of grief. And in doing so, we could also meet each other on the other side of the spectrum, which is joy. The true honoring of our connection with Carl and the cherishing of the moments that we did get to share with such a beautiful soul. Everybody showed up in an incredible way, and I'm so grateful for their attentiveness and their participation and their expression in the process. We did bring people into song at one point where they were reluctant to join me in the call and response, but it was beautiful nonetheless. And some drumming as well. And both song and drumming are important to connect everybody in the shared felt experience, and also to help transmute some of that energy, right? To really move the energy so that it doesn't stagnate in the body. A lot of people shared incredible stories of Carl, and then we had one final ritual, which was a bit of a fire ritual with tobacco. So each person took a pinch of tobacco and approached the fire and said internally their final goodbye, I suppose, to his form, right? We know that he will remain with us in our energetic experience, but to really release attachment to his form so that he can transition in a good way. So the encouragement was to say, I love you and I release you, along with whatever else we wanted to say to Carl, and offer the tobacco to the fire. The reason why tobacco is significant is because it is a communicator. It opens up that doorway or portal or line of communication to spirit, to the spirit world, maybe to Great Spirit if that's what we believe in, or whatever higher powers of divinity. It also is a cleansing agent. It has many significant properties that it can support us with. And in that moment, we were using it as a communicator. The whole ritual was accompanied by the handpan that was played by Carl's other friend named Dan. And there was so much beauty. There was so much beauty in that moment. I could feel the richness of it and the realness of all that it represented. And I can't capture it in words. It was really a shared felt experience. Another moment that I'm jumping out of order here, but I think is worth honoring, is when our other brother Ryan played the Native American flute. He played Amazing Grace. And again, the power of music to open up the space. That's when I really felt Carl's presence the strongest in the ceremony. I felt him there with us. And the impression I got from my perception of his essence was that he was smiling, that he was at peace. After Ryan played that song, he actually gifted his flute, which is this incredible drone flute, so it has 2 chambers. He gifted it to Bianca and said that it was a gift to her and the kids. And it was a really incredible gesture. And he said that it wasn't premeditated, it just felt compelling in the moment to do so. And I think that's part of the grace that unfolds in ceremony as we meet each other in that vulnerable space, and we try to pay attention and listen to the intelligence that is co-created and also that comes beyond us. So Spirit is operating through us to guide us in a good way so that we may meet each other. Just meet each other in the beauty of the moment. The merciful nature of grief is that it doesn't all come at once. So I know that I'll be hit with waves of grief and loss and longing. Here's one now, in a timely manner. And longing for my connection with my brother Carl, right? To have him here in form, to hug him and to adventure with him. And so I know that this is an ongoing process, as grief is really, it's really love with nowhere to go. And I know that I could still open up to that love as I think about our connection and really call his energy in any given moment. And an alternative philosophy to that might be a little idealistic, but it's said by some masters that if we were to really fully open up ourselves to the full expanse of the emotion, that energy, that charge that wants to come through us, so the full grief, if we could experience it all fully, then we could be done with it. And then I wouldn't have to remember Carl in that energetic sensation, but I could remember him in joy and love and in gratitude and thanksgiving for all the beautiful moments that we did share. Carl truly is a beautiful being, and his expression in this particular iteration of life was astounding. He had the ability to really see people and meet people from all walks of life where they're at, in full acceptance and presence. And that's something that I will carry forward with me. He has inspired me to live my life in that way. Thank you all for being here and joining me in this process of grief and celebration. Wishing you all peace, acceptance, and beauty in your journey. Until next time, be well. Thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment and perhaps sharing with others. And if you are curious about some of the services I offer, you can check out my website, connectionintegration.com. You'll see on there that I offer one-on-one support and guidance based around spiritual and mental wellness. I also offer nature connection experiences and plant medicine retreats throughout the year. Until next time, wishing you much curiosity, wonder, and peace as you open yourself up to the wild, tameless. Be well.